It was my husband's birthday party, and yet he was capable of locking me outside in the middle of a thunderstorm, all because I dared to throw out his mistress who had the audacity to show up at my own home to celebrate with us. As I shivered in the rain, through the window, I saw them laughing, eating, and opening gifts as if nothing had happened. An hour later, a luxury black car pulled up in front of the house. I froze. It was my grandmother from a small town in Iowa, who I had always seen as a simple countrywoman, but who was, in reality, a multi-millionaire. Seeing me soaked to the bone, she looked at me, then at the house, and uttered only one sentence: "Reduce it to rubble." What happened next turned my husband's birthday party into the beginning of his total ruin. But before I tell you everything from the beginning, write in the comments what city or country you're watching these stories from, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for even more intense tales. That evening, the house was buzzing with life. The enormous crystal chandelier in the main living room bathed everything in a warm light that reflected off the walls adorned with flowers and balloons. Music played in the background, barely cutting through the murmur of conversation and the laughter of the guests. It was the birthday of Michael, my husband, and I had been working non-stop since morning to make everything perfect. I checked the catering, adjusted the decorators' work, counted the silverware, arranged the floral centerpieces on the tables, and even personally ironed Michael's suit. My legs and back ached, but all I wanted was to see him happy and proud of his party. I thought that maybe tonight he would remember that I was still his wife. Carrying a tray of drinks, I stood in a corner observing him. Michael was surrounded by colleagues and business partners. He laughed loudly, gesturing as if he were the master of the world. He looked elegant in his expensive suit. A brand-name watch gleamed on his wrist. He held a glass of wine in his hand. However, something pierced my heart. At no point did he introduce me as his wife. I moved among the guests with the tray held high, like one of the waitresses. When I approached to offer him a glass of water, he barely nodded in thanks, without looking me in the eye. The man to whom I had given everything didn't even seem to recognize me as the lady of the house. To most of those present, I was part of the staff. I tried to tell myself I was exaggerating, that he was just busy attending to his important contacts. I smiled as best I could at the wives of his partners, who measured me from head to toe with a certain disdain, seeing my simple shoes, modest dress, and neatly styled appearance. While they showcased designer outfits, sky-high heels, and flashy jewelry, I wore the best I had, something discreet, because Michael never gave me much money for personal expenses. He said it was to teach me to be frugal. Pride burned within me, but I swallowed it all. I kept telling myself that this was Michael's night and I shouldn't spoil it. Suddenly, the guests' gazes began to turn towards the entrance. The conversations gradually died down, replaced by whispers of admiration. I turned my head and saw a woman entering, who looked as if she had just stepped off a red carpet. It was Jessica. She wore a fitted, sparkling evening gown that highlighted every curve of her body. Perfect makeup, hair styled in soft waves falling over her shoulders, she walked with a confidence that filled the room, as if she knew all eyes belonged to her. But what really hurt me was the look on Michael's face at that moment. As soon as he saw her, his face lit up far more than it had when he saw me that same morning. Michael cut off his conversation with his partners mid-sentence and walked quickly towards her, smiling from ear to ear. "Jessica, what a surprise," he said with almost boyish enthusiasm. She clung to his arm, pressing her body against his, without the slightest hesitation in front of everyone. No one seemed to be bothered that she was embracing another man's husband, much less the host. I stood frozen, the tray trembling in my hands. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. As if that weren't enough, Mrs. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, appeared. Towards me, she was always harsh, critical, never having a kind word for me, but at the sight of Jessica, she transformed. She embraced her as if she were a daughter she hadn't seen in years. She showered her with kisses and smiles. "But look who's here," Mrs. Eleanor exclaimed, almost singing. "You look beautiful, darling. Come, I'll introduce you to everyone." She took Jessica by the arm and led her to the center of the living room, introducing her to the important guests. She spoke wonderfully of her career, her style, her supposedly good family. Before my eyes, she treated her like the perfect daughter-in-law she had always wanted. I listened to those words, feeling my world slowly fall apart. I was Michael's legal wife, the one who cared for Mrs. Eleanor when she was sick, who cooked, cleaned, washed, and ironed, who was by his side when Michael was still counting every penny to pay the rent on a tiny room. And yet, that night, in my own home, I was invisible, while my husband's mistress was treated like a queen. My heart began to beat so hard I could hear it in my ears. I gripped the tray so tightly my knuckles turned white. I bit my lip almost to the point of bleeding. I tried to breathe deeply, to tell myself that there was some explanation for all of this, that maybe Michael had simply invited Jessica as a colleague from work. But the way he looked at her, the way she leaned on his arm, the giggles they shared left no room for doubt. I realized that if I stayed where I was for another minute, I would break down in front of everyone. Then, without much of a plan, I set the tray down on a nearby table with a dry clatter that made the glasses ring, and I walked towards them on slightly trembling legs. I stood before Michael and Jessica. He was leaning towards her, listening to something she was whispering in his ear, laughing as if she were the center of the universe. I looked him in the eyes, holding back tears with all my might. "Michael," I said in a slightly trembling but firm voice, "what is the meaning of all this? Why is this woman here, acting as if she's the lady of the house?" Several guests turned in our direction. A silence began to spread. The smile vanished from Michael's face, and his gaze turned icy. "Sarah, don't start," he muttered. "Don't make a scene at my party." Jessica laughed softly, almost mockingly. "I just came to celebrate the birthday of a man I love," she added in a sweet voice. "Don't be so uptight and jealous, Sarah. You're ruining the atmosphere." Her words cut me like a knife, rage and humiliation mixed with pain. I felt the blood rush to my face. Then I pointed to the front door. "This is my house," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear me, "and he is my legal husband. I am asking you to leave immediately. Jessica, you are not welcome here." A hush fell over the living room. Some guests held their breath. The music was still playing, but after a moment, someone turned it off. The clinking of glasses being set down could be heard. Mrs. Eleanor reacted immediately and stood between us. "What a lack of respect!" she shouted. "How dare you throw out such an important guest? Jessica has far more class than you and fits into this environment better. You're just making a fool of yourself." Every word she spoke was like a slap in the face in front of everyone. I looked at her in disbelief. "I am your daughter-in-law," I wanted to say. "The one who took care of you in the hospital, who drove you to your doctor's appointments." But Michael grabbed my wrist before I could respond. His face was burning with rage. "Enough of this, Sarah," he hissed through his teeth, squeezing so hard it hurt. "You're ruining my birthday. All you ever do is create problems." "I'm trying to break free. I'm just defending my dignity as a wife," I managed to reply. He didn't want to listen. He started dragging me from the living room in front of everyone, as if I were a capricious child. I felt the stares, the whispers, an occasional malicious smile. No one came to help me. Jessica and Mrs. Eleanor watched us with triumphant expressions. Michael walked quickly, and I almost tripped trying to keep up. We crossed the hall and reached the front door. Outside, the sky was black, heavy with clouds. The distant rumble of thunder and the intense drumming of rain on the pavement could be heard. Michael threw the door wide open. A cold wind and water hit us in the face like a bucket of cold water. "If you can't accept Jessica," he shouted over the roar of the storm, "then you have no place in this house. I want her to be here. If she leaves, I'll leave too." "Michael, please," I managed to say, but he cut me off. "Consider this your choice." Without another word, he brutally pushed me outside. I lost my balance and almost fell to my knees on the flooded porch. Before I could collect myself, he slammed the door shut. A moment later, I heard the metallic sound of the key turning in the lock. That combination of sounds, the thud of the wood and the click of the lock, sounded to me like the final closing of a chapter in my life. I stood motionless for a moment, my back to the door, feeling the rain seep through every seam of my clothing. My dress clung to my body, my clothes were soaked, and water began to run down my neck. I was so cold my teeth were chattering. I turned and started pounding on the door with my fists. "Michael! Michael! Open up!" I shouted with all my might. I called out again and again, but no one answered. From the other side, the faint sound of music reached me again, as if the party had resumed. The rain intensified. Water poured down my face, mixing with tears, blinding me. My fingers ached from pounding. Finally, I dropped them limply to my sides. I took a few shaky steps and walked around the house until I reached the large living room window. The glass was covered with raindrops, but I could see enough. Inside, the party continued. Michael, with his hair perfectly coiffed and in a dry shirt, stood next to Jessica in front of a huge multi-tiered cake. He was smiling broadly. As they both held the knife together to cut the first slice, Mrs. Eleanor clapped beside them, proud, as if she were witnessing a wedding. The guests, comfortably seated and well-fed, celebrated, laughed, made toasts, and ate the food I had ordered that very day. I rested my cold hand on the cold glass. For a moment, I wanted to hit it with all my strength, to shatter it, to storm into the living room and scream, "I am the legal wife. This house is also mine. I am dying of cold outside while you are making toasts." But my strength was failing me. My lips were blue, my legs numb. As I watched Michael feed Jessica the first bite of cake and how she flirtatiously wiped a smudge of frosting from the corner of his mouth with her finger, my mind filled with memories. I saw him as he once was. In the days when we lived in a rented room and the rain leaked through the roof, I remembered his promises. "When I succeed, you will live like a queen, Sarah, trust me." I remembered the day I sold the little jewelry my mother had left me to give him the capital for his first investment. I remembered all those times I ate dry bread with salt while he took a businessman's lunch to meetings. I did all of this convinced that we were acting as a couple, that we were fighting together. And now he was sharing a cake with another woman in a house bought in large part thanks to the decisions I had made out of love. I don't know how long I stood by the window. The rain chilled me to the bone. Every second became heavier as if the clock had stopped. The cold was no longer just a discomfort, it was a deep pain in my bones. Finally, my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the flooded patio. The water rose to the hem of my dress, surrounding me, freezing me. Shivering uncontrollably, I wrapped my arms around myself. My breath became ragged as if the air itself had decided to abandon me. I closed my eyes and, sighing, I prayed in silence. God, if this night is my last, do not let all this pain go without justice. Let them see what they have done. I felt sleep pulling me into a dark abyss. Suddenly, an intense light pierced through my eyelids. It was not a flash of lightning. It was a steady, strong light that was approaching. With difficulty, I opened my eyes. A huge black car was cutting through the rain and stopping in front of the gate. The gleam of the emblem on the hood told me it was a luxury vehicle, the kind only true millionaires own. The engine died, and at almost the same moment, the front door opened. A chauffeur in a dark suit and cap got out quickly, opened a huge black umbrella, and walked around the car to the back door. The rain bounced off the umbrella as he opened it with a practiced move. Then, he respectfully opened the back seat door. First, I saw a foot in an elegant, low-heeled shoe of good quality, which stood firmly on the wet ground. Then, an elderly woman appeared, upright despite her age, wrapped in a thick coat. In one hand, she held a cane with a golden knob that shone in the porch light. Her eyes scanned the garden, the entrance, the house, until they rested on me, lying on the wet ground. Her features hardened. She approached quickly, ignoring the puddles that splashed the bottom of her coat. When she reached me, I recognized her. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice barely audible. It was my grandmother, Rose, the same one who lived in a remote town in Iowa, who sometimes came with bags of potatoes, vegetables, and fruits, saying everything was from her garden. I always thought she lived like many elderly people, off a small piece of land. She knelt beside me, unconcerned about the water. She took my face in her warm hands and frowned with concern and anger. "Sarah, my child," she said, "what have they done to you?" She took off her coat and wrapped it around me, holding me tight, while the chauffeur and two other tall men, evidently bodyguards, approached and stood a few steps behind us, waiting for orders. My grandmother looked up at the large, lit window. From our position, we could clearly see Michael, Jessica, and Mrs. Eleanor laughing by the cake, as if nothing bad was happening on the same property. An expression I had never seen on her face appeared on my grandmother's face. Her lips tightened into a thin line. Her gaze became sharp, almost cutting. She rose with the help of her cane, and, without taking her eyes off the house, she muttered, but in a tone so firm it sounded like a military command, "Reduce it to rubble." The bodyguards immediately nodded. They asked no questions. They moved towards the main door, walking with a determined stride. The chauffeur helped me to my feet with great care, as if he feared I might fall apart, and opened the umbrella over me and my grandmother as we followed them. The first two bodyguards reached the main door. They didn't waste time ringing the bell or knocking politely. One stepped forward, planted his foot against the door, and delivered a dry, brutal kick. The sound echoed throughout the hall. The lock gave way. The door flew open, hitting the wall. A cold, damp wind suddenly rushed into the living room, bringing with it the smell of rain and wet earth, but also something more. The harbinger of a storm that this time was about to fall on those who were inside. In the living room, the guests froze. The music stopped. Michael, who was about to feed Jessica another spoonful of cake, dropped the fork, which clattered as it hit the floor. Jessica hid behind him, frightened. "Mrs." Eleanor opened her eyes and mouth at the same time, not believing what she was seeing. Michael, always impulsive, reacted first, rushing furiously towards the door. "Who are you people?" he screamed. "You're breaking into private property. This is my house. Get out before I call the police." He tried to push one of the bodyguards to throw him out, but when his hand hit the man's chest, it was like hitting a wall. The bodyguard didn't even move, just pushed Michael's arm away with a minimal gesture, and Michael staggered back, almost falling onto the buffet table. By then, all of my grandmother's people had entered and were positioning themselves at various points in the living room, forming a semicircle that isolated the entrance. The guests, still with glasses in their hands, didn't know what to do. At that moment, my grandmother and I entered. The sound of her cane hitting the marble accompanied her steps. Tap, tap, tap. I, wrapped in the coat with water dripping from my dress, walked by her side, supported by the chauffeur. My appearance was a complete contrast to the luxury of the living room. Water dripped from my clothes onto the gleaming floor, leaving a trail of moisture. A murmur went through the remaining guests. Michael looked at us, first confused, then outraged. Mrs. Eleanor, trying to regain her role as lady of the house, burst into sarcastic laughter. Well, she said. "I thought it was burglars, but it turns out it's Sarah's country grandmother. What a pathetic scene." Jessica relaxed a little upon hearing this and allowed herself a superior smile. "She's probably come to beg for food," Mrs. Eleanor added with contempt. "This is a private party." My grandmother didn't answer right away. She stopped under the crystal chandelier, lifted her chin, and looked in turn at Michael, Mrs. Eleanor, and Jessica. Her cold gaze made more than one guest look down. She struck the end of her cane hard on the floor. "I have not come to ask for anything," she said in a tone that silenced even the boldest. "I have come to reclaim what 3 ungrateful people should never have enjoyed." Michael crossed his arms. "What are you talking about?" he sneered. "This house is mine. Sarah, get your grandmother out of here. She's lost her mind. If you don't leave, I'll have the neighborhood security drag you out. The sight of the floor stained with the water you brought in disgusts me." One of the bodyguards took a step towards Michael, ready to silence him by force, but my grandmother raised her hand. "No," she said, "I'll handle this." She turned to me, adjusted my coat with infinite tenderness, and whispered, "Watch closely, child. Tonight, you will see how life pays back everything they have done to you." Then, without taking her eyes off Michael, she made a barely perceptible gesture with her head towards her head of security. That was enough. The bodyguards dispersed in silence. One went to the cake table, that tower which just a moment ago had been the pride of the living room. He placed both hands on its base and, with a single push, knocked it to the floor. The gigantic cake smashed onto the marble with a thud, scattering layers of sponge cake and cream everywhere. The guests let out stifled cries. Before they could react, another bodyguard stood next to the long buffet table and pulled hard on the tablecloth. Plates, silver platters, bowls of salad, crystal glasses, everything came crashing down. The sound of shattering glass was deafening. The food I had so carefully ordered was spread across the floor like garbage. Some female guests screamed in fear, moving away to avoid being hit by shards of glass. A third bodyguard pulled at the structure of balloons and flowers, which fell onto several chairs. Another, in the back, kicked a huge painting that Michael had commissioned with a photo of himself and Jessica. The frame broke, the glass shattered into tiny pieces. The perfect image of the happy couple landed on the floor, trampled. The room, which just minutes before had been a scene of luxury, had turned into a battlefield. Michael tried to break through to stop the destruction, but two bodyguards stood in his way, motionless as columns. "Mrs." Eleanor shouted insults at my grandmother, calling her an old lunatic and a barbarian, while she watched her expensive furniture being dragged, ornaments smashed, and floral arrangements destroyed. My grandmother stood in the middle, observing everything with calculated coolness. She took her phone out of her coat pocket, typed something, and a few seconds later, the lights began to flicker. Finally, they went out completely. Only some emergency lights and the flickering glow of lightning coming through the windows remained. Panic finally gripped the guests. No one was thinking about protocol or appearances anymore. They started running towards the exit, tripping over each other, looking for any door that would lead them out of this nightmare. No one had the courage to approach Michael to support him. In less than 10 minutes, there was not a single guest left in the living room. It was just us, my grandmother, me, the bodyguards, a doctor who had come with her, Michael, Jessica, and Mrs. Eleanor. My grandmother walked to the main sofa, the one where Michael used to sit like the king of the place, and sat down with all the calm in the world. She rested her cane beside her, crossed her legs, and adopted a posture that clearly showed who was now in charge of this house. The doctor approached me, placed a dry blanket on my shoulders, told me to sit, and checked my pulse, breathing, and temperature. He gave me a cup of hot tea, and as I drank it, I felt a little warmth return to my body. After being treated worse than a servant, this care made me feel human again. My grandmother, seeing that my condition was stable, gave a signal to her assistant. He opened a leather briefcase and took out a thick, dark blue folder, which he placed in her hands. My grandmother took the folder, lifted it, and threw it on the coffee table with a dry thud. Michael's eyes followed the object's movement. "Before you start spouting nonsense about reporting this to the police and putting anyone in jail," my grandmother said, "read this." Michael swallowed hard. His face was still red with anger, but a shadow of fear began to appear in his eyes. He took the folder with trembling hands, opened it, and began to read. At first, he frowned as if he didn't understand. As he turned the pages, the color drained from his face until he was as pale as paper. Cold sweat ran down his temples. His lips moved, silently reading legal terms, numbers, names. Jessica, next to him, tried to look over his shoulder. When she managed to see the heading of one of the documents, she covered her mouth with her hand in horror. Mrs. Eleanor, impatient, snatched a page from the folder to see for herself. She read a few lines, and her legs gave way. She collapsed strengthlessly to the floor. The folder contained the real deed to the house, loan agreements, and a promissory note for several $1,000,000 issued by Michael's company. In those papers, it was clearly stated that the owner of the property was not Michael, but a company called Rosewood Holdings, and the absolute owner of that group was my grandmother, Rose. Furthermore, documents were attached proving that Michael had been siphoning money from the company to pay for the house, cars, parties, and even trips with Jessica. The clauses were clear. Upon finding a breach of contract and misuse of funds, all assets acquired with that money were subject to immediate seizure. Legally, at that moment, the house ceased to be in his use. My grandmother leaned back on the sofa and spoke in a firm voice. "For years," she said, "I was the silent investor who propped up the company where you work. I invested in this business for one reason, Sarah. I wanted my granddaughter to have a comfortable life. I didn't want you to know who was putting up the money, so you wouldn't feel less of a man. I gave you opportunities, capital, trust, and what did you do with it? You betrayed my granddaughter. You humiliated her. You threw her out of her own home in the rain to let your mistress in." Michael shook his head. No, that's impossible," he stammered. "You're an old woman from the country. You always come with bags of potatoes. How can you be the owner of a business group? These papers are fake. I invite you to the notary's office tomorrow, to the property records, to the bank that's listed there," my grandmother replied. "They will tell you the same thing. And if you prefer, I'll introduce you to my lawyer, who is also your boss on the board of directors." Mrs. Eleanor, still on the floor, crawled towards the sofa. "Rose, please," she moaned. "This is all a misunderstanding. I never wanted to hurt Sarah. I just thought Jessica could help our son get ahead. I didn't know who you were. Please, don't take the house from us. We are family." She clung to the edge of the sofa, trying to touch my grandmother's skirt, but one of the bodyguards stood in the way and gently moved her away, preventing contact. The scene was pathetic. The same woman who had humiliated me a few hours earlier was now crawling, ready to say anything to preserve her comfort. Jessica, meanwhile, began to slowly back away towards a side door, clutching her handbag to her body. My grandmother noticed her and slightly raised her chin. The head of security moved quickly, stood in front of Jessica, and held out his hand. "The purse," he ordered. Jessica clutched it tighter. "It's mine," she replied nervously. "Who are you to ask me for it?" The bodyguard snatched the purse from her without effort and emptied its contents onto a table. Several rings, necklaces, and gold bracelets fell out, which Mrs. Eleanor immediately recognized as her own. "Thief!" she shouted, forgetting her role as a victim for a moment. "No wonder you liked her so much." My grandmother didn't even spare Jessica a word. She struck her cane on the floor. "I am not interested in your fake apologies or tears," she said, looking at the three of them. "I am only interested in justice for my granddaughter. From this moment on, this house, the cars, the furniture, and everything you bought with the company's money is mine. You have 10 minutes to disappear from here. No bags, no suitcases, no jewelry, just with what you're wearing." Michael opened his mouth to protest. "This is illegal. You can't throw us out on the street. I built this house with my effort. You built it with my money," my grandmother interrupted. "I decide who it belongs to. 10 minutes, Michael. Not one more. And if you're still here after that," she glanced at her watch, "you will leave the same way you threw my granddaughter out. By force. The clock is ticking." Michael rushed towards the stairs to go to the master bedroom and grab anything. An expensive watch, money, documents. 2 bodyguards stood in his way. "I need to go up," he pleaded. "I just need my wallet and my phone." "The lady's orders," one replied without moving, "are that no one enters any room. Everything is seized." Michael changed his target. He ran to the table where the keys to his sports car lay, but a bodyguard beat him to it, took them, and pocketed them. Meanwhile, Mrs. Eleanor crawled over to me. She tried to take my hand. "Sarah, darling, you're a good person," she cried. "Tell your grandmother not to do this to us. We are your family. How can you let your husband and mother-in-law sleep on the street?" She looked at me desperately, expecting to see the same submissive woman as always. I pulled my hand back. "Family doesn't throw a daughter out in the rain to defend a stranger," I replied in a calm voice. "Family doesn't mock her pain and call her a disgrace in front of everyone. Today, you are only tasting a fraction of what you did to me." She wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. The 10 minutes were up. My grandmother raised her cane and struck the floor. The bodyguards moved into action. They formed a cordon around Michael, Mrs. Eleanor, and Jessica, and began to push them towards the exit. They resisted, cried, screamed, tried to grab onto furniture, walls, door frames. It was no use. They were brought to the threshold and pushed out onto the porch, which was still flooded with rain. The wind whipped their faces, their expensive clothes clinging to their bodies. The door closed behind them with force, and the deadbolt slid shut loudly. It was the exact same sound I had heard when Michael threw me out, only now the roles were reversed. I was inside, dry and safe. They were outside, soaked. My grandmother turned to the house staff, who had stayed out of the way for fear of Michael and Mrs. Eleanor. "I want you to clean all this up," she ordered, "and gather all the personal belongings of those 3. Clothes, photos, papers, souvenirs. Whatever can be donated, donate it. The rest, destroy. I don't want any trace of them in this house. I looked through the window. Outside, Michael was pounding on the door with his fists, shouting, but his voice was lost in the roar of the storm. Mrs. Eleanor was crying loudly, sobbing Michael's name as if he were a child whose toy had been taken away. Jessica was looking towards the street, calculating her next move. There was no trace of pity left in me, only a feeling of sad calm. Finally, life was teaching them what it was like to be on the other side. The rain fell on them without mercy. Within minutes, their elegant outfits were just as soaked as mine had been. Their hairstyles were ruined. Jessica's makeup ran, leaving dark streaks on her cheeks. The house, which had always been lit up like a storefront, had several of its exterior lights turned off on my grandmother's order. The street in front of the mansion was plunged into semi-darkness, illuminated only by distant streetlights. The guests' cars were already gone. No one had stayed to offer help. It turned out that friendships built on money and prestige disappear with the first clap of thunder. Michael wrapped his arms around himself, his jaw clenched, his pride wounded to the core. He was soaked, without car keys, without a home, and without an idea of what to do. Mrs. Eleanor began to complain in her shrill voice, interspersing sobs with coughs. "This is all your fault, Michael," she accused him. "How could you not realize who that old woman was? How did you let the company depend on her? Look where you've brought us. Out in the open, in the rain, like homeless people." Michael, exhausted and overwhelmed, exploded. "Shut up, Mom," he shouted. "If you hadn't interfered in everything, if you hadn't supported bringing Jessica home, none of this would have happened." The argument grew louder. Jessica, standing at a distance, looked at them with a mixture of anger and contempt. Her dress clung to her body, her heels sank into the mud. She didn't shed a single tear, just clenched her teeth. "You know what?" she finally called out. "I'm not going to freeze out here with you. I wasn't born to be poor." At that moment, a taxi slowly drove down the street. Jessica ran to the gate, waving desperately. The taxi stopped. Michael tried to approach. "Jessica, wait. Let's go together. We can start over somewhere else." "With you?" She laughed bitterly. "For what? To live in some hovel and eat scraps? No, thank you. I've wasted enough time on you." She took a step towards the taxi. Michael, desperate, tried to grab the handle, but she pushed his hand away. "It's over, Michael. The only thing about you that interested me is left in there," she said, pointing to the house. "I'm not going to drag a loser around with me." She got into the taxi and slammed the door. The car drove off and disappeared into the rain. Michael watched it go with his mouth half open. Then he reached into his inner pocket, searching for the small wad of cash he kept for emergencies. It was empty. He suddenly realized that during the chaos at the party, when Jessica had clung to him in fear, she had taken the opportunity to steal the last of his money. The night seemed endless. Wet and shivering, Michael and Mrs. Eleanor wandered the streets, looking for some shelter. The bus stops were occupied, the porches fenced. Security guards shooed them away, seeing their deplorable appearance. Finally, they found a bench in a relatively quiet park. They sat there, huddled together, trembling, waiting for dawn. The bench was hard and cold. Every gust of wind pierced them to the bone. Mrs. Eleanor coughed incessantly. Michael could barely think clearly. Memories of the house, the party, the kick to the door mixed with the sound of the rain. For the first time since he had started earning money, he was sleeping on the street. When dawn began to brighten the sky, the sun's rays fell directly on Michael's face, forcing him to open his eyes. His whole body ached. Next to him, Mrs. Eleanor was sleeping curled up, using her empty purse as a pillow. Her face was expressionless, completely different from the confident and arrogant woman she had been. Michael gently woke her. "Mom, get up. We have to do something. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. I'll go to the office, talk to the higher-ups. They surely don't know what that old woman did. I'm still a director. They owe me money. We can sort this out." That hope kept him alive. In the same wrinkled and damp clothes from the previous night, he helped his mother up. They started walking towards the financial district, where the company building was located. The journey was torture. They walked in the sun, which was beginning to heat up, with empty stomachs. People looked at them with curiosity, and even contempt. Their wrinkled and dirty evening clothes, their dark-circled eyes contrasted with the impeccable suits of the office workers. When they reached the lobby of the company building, Michael tried to regain his composure, ran a hand through his hair, brushed off his jacket a little, and confidently pushed the glass doors. But he had barely taken a few steps when the security guards, who usually greeted him with respect, blocked his way. "Mr. Thompson, you can't come in," one of them said. Michael was indignant. "What are you talking about? I'm your boss. Move aside before I fire you." "Not anymore, sir," the guard replied with an awkward but firm expression. "An order came in this morning. You are terminated, effective immediately. Furthermore, you are banned from entering the building. Your name is on a blacklist. I'm sorry." "I want to see that order," Michael demanded. The guard, with a sigh, led him to the reception desk. There, pinned to a bulletin board, was a sheet of paper with the company letterhead and the signature of a legal representative. The text clearly stated that Michael had been fired for violating the code of ethics, misappropriation of funds, and damaging the company's reputation. It also specified that all his assets would be seized to cover the losses. There was even his photo next to the note, "Person not authorized to enter." Passing employees stopped and looked with curiosity. Some who had previously laughed at his jokes now whispered behind his back, commenting on the scandal. He felt the ground give way beneath his feet. The security guards escorted him to the exit. "You can't do this to me," Michael repeated, speaking more to the company than to them. "I need to go in. I have personal belongings there." "All your belongings are being reviewed by the legal department," one of the guards replied. "If anything is found to be truly personal, it will be delivered to you. For now, you must leave." They gently pushed him onto the street, and the glass doors closed behind him. The life he had built around his office was over. Not giving up completely, Michael thought of his savings account. He clearly remembered having accumulated a significant sum in his personal account. He left Mrs. Eleanor waiting on a nearby bench and ran to the nearest bank branch. He entered, out of breath, asked to speak with an advisor, claiming he had lost his wallet and needed to withdraw money with his ID. A kind employee assisted him, took his details, entered the information into the computer, and as she read the screen, her face grew serious. "Mr. Thompson," she finally said, "I'm sorry to inform you that all of your accounts have been frozen by court order. There's a notice here of a lawsuit for misappropriation of funds, and the creditors have requested a complete freeze of your assets. Until the process is over, you cannot withdraw a single cent." "That's impossible," Michael stammered. "That money is mine." "I'm sorry," the employee repeated. "There's nothing I can do." He left the bank in a daze. His head was spinning. The last hope of having any money had vanished. He returned to the bench in the square where his mother was waiting. She looked at him with eyes full of expectation, her voice hoarse from the cold and crying. "Well, did you get the money? Let's go get something to eat." Michael shook his head, unable to utter a word. "Mrs." Eleanor covered her face with her hands and began to cry again, this time a deep sob of someone who feels the ground disappearing. Hunger began to bite. Michael searched his jacket, digging in a secret inner pocket where he used to keep a few bills in reserve. He found nothing. Then he remembered Jessica's touch at the party, how she had hugged him, how she had held him. He realized she had taken that money too. He cursed, but it did little good. In the end, with the few coins they had left, they bought a loaf of bread to share. It was all they could afford that day. Later, desperate for some cash, Michael sold his most expensive suit at a pawn shop. The buyer gave him a ridiculous fraction of its value. Still, that money was enough to rent a wretched room for a week in a damp alley and buy a few servings of cheap food. The room was small, with moisture-stained walls, a tin roof, an old mattress on the floor, and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The smell of must mixed with the smell of the sewer outside. Mrs. Eleanor held her nose as she entered. "I can't live like this," she complained. "This is worse than a chicken coop." "This is all we have," Michael replied, exhausted. "It's either this or the street. Shut up and be glad we have a roof over our heads." That first night, they ate in silence, sharing a plate of rice with some cheap stew. Outside, voices could be heard. Neighbors arguing, someone's television with the volume turned up to the maximum, mosquitoes buzzing in the dark. Mrs. Eleanor coughed more and more. Access to doctors and medicine was now a luxury they couldn't afford. While they were falling, my life was turning in the opposite direction. My grandmother took me to her main residence, a spacious estate surrounded by green gardens, far from the hustle and bustle of downtown. There, for the first time in a long time, I woke up in a comfortable bed, in clean and soft sheets, without having to get up early to prepare breakfast and 1,000 special coffees for anyone. The household staff treated me with respect. They called me Miss Sarah. They offered to help with my clothes, with food, with everything. But my grandmother didn't want me to remain in the position of a protected little girl. "Money without character will make you vulnerable," she said. "You will learn how to manage what is yours, and if someone tries to trample on you again, they will have no way to attack you." Thus began my true transformation. Every day, my grandmother would sit with me in her office. She explained to me how Rosewood Holdings worked, the development projects, the investments, the alliances. She taught me to read financial statements, understand contracts, identify risks. At first, I felt intimidated. I had spent years between the kitchen and the laundry room, but I soon realized that deep down, I had always had a knack for organizing, anticipating, managing. No one had just given me the chance. My grandmother insisted firmly, but always with tenderness. "I don't want the next Michael that appears in your life to tell you that you're worthless. I want him to know that if he loses you, he loses everything." My external appearance began to reflect my internal change. I abandoned the worn-out clothes I had worn for so many years and started dressing in elegant and sober outfits, in line with my faith and my new role. My style became part of a careful look, not a sad obligation. A touch of makeup brought color back to my face. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Instead of the scared and perpetually apologetic wife, I saw someone who finally knew her worth. The day I walked into the Rosewood Holdings building as the future chairwoman of the board, the employees spontaneously rose to their feet at my sight. I went to the head of the conference room and led my first meeting. There were nerves, yes, but also confidence. I didn't have to ask any man for permission to be there. The news quickly reached the media. They spoke of me as the hidden heiress, the new face of Rosewood Holdings. One afternoon, Michael, who had become a porter at a market, took refuge in a small cafe to escape the rain. He sat on a plastic chair, his back aching from the weight of the crates he had been carrying. Above his head, an old television was broadcasting the news. When he looked up, he saw my image on the screen. I was sitting in a television studio, answering questions about the company's new housing projects and social programs. My voice sounded confident. My eyes shone. Michael stared, frozen. It took him a moment to accept that it was me. I looked like a different person. He felt a lump in his throat. For the first time, regret cut him deeper than just the matter of money. He realized he had thrown away something infinitely precious. Immediately, his mind began to search for a way out. "Sarah was always good," he told himself. "She always forgave me. Maybe if I beg her for forgiveness on my knees, she'll take me back. She has a big heart. We could start over." The next day, he decided to play his last card. He spent the last of his money on transportation to the financial district and stood in front of the Rosewood Holdings skyscraper. He entered the lobby, which seemed to be made of marble and glass, with his heart pounding in his chest. He went to the reception desk. "I want to see Miss Sarah," he said, trying to sound confident. "I'm her husband." The receptionist sized him up. Worn clothes, several days' stubble, the smell of sweat, and the market. Feigning professional calm, she discreetly pressed a button to call security. Through the intercom, she said, "There's a disturbed man here who claims to be the CEO's husband. He looks unstable." Michael raised his voice. "Tell her to come down. Tell her Michael is here. She knows me. I am her husband." Some passing employees turned to see what was happening. Muffled giggles could be heard. 3 security guards, different from those at his old company but just as firm, approached. "You have to leave, sir," one said. "I'm not moving from here until I see her," Michael insisted. "Tell her I'm here." The guards didn't argue. They each grabbed him by an arm and led him towards the exit while he tried to break free, shouting my name. They put him out on the sidewalk and let him go in front of the building. At that moment, a luxury car stopped in front of the main entrance. The chauffeur opened the back door. I got out of the car with a briefcase in my hand, followed by my assistant. Michael, seeing me, felt as if he had been struck by lightning. "Sarah!" he shouted. "Sarah, it's me!" He tried to run towards me, but the security guards blocked him before he could get close. I heard my name in the distance and instinctively turned my head. Our eyes met for a moment. In his eyes, I saw desperation, fear, nostalgia. In mine, there was no longer love or hate, only a vast distance. I barely nodded, as if acknowledging the existence of an old acquaintance, and then I turned towards the glass doors. I entered the building, and the automatic system closed the entrance behind me, definitively separating our paths. Michael was left on the sidewalk with his hands down, while people passed by him without paying him any attention. Time moved on. In the little room in the alley, the air grew heavier. The humidity worsened. Fungus took over the walls. Mrs. Eleanor weakened day by day. Her cough became more violent and frequent. The prescribed medications cost more than they could pay. Michael, sitting by the half-open door, counted the few coins he had left. He knew they wouldn't be enough for this month's rent. The landlord had already started pressuring them. He thought about the past, the expensive restaurants, the bottles of wine he opened just for show, the money he lost on stupid bets. Every memory weighed on him like a stone. One afternoon, a strange silence fell over the alley. The children stopped screaming. The neighbor's television went off. The engine of an approaching expensive car could be heard. It was not normal for a black luxury sedan to enter this labyrinth of low houses and hanging cables. The neighbors came out to their doorsteps, whispering. The car stopped right in front of the room where Michael and Mrs. Eleanor lived. The chauffeur got out, opened the back door, and I got out with 2 bodyguards. I was wearing an elegant suit. My appearance was impeccable. My shoes didn't have a single spot. My presence contrasted with the surroundings, but I maintained a firm expression. Michael, who was standing in the doorway, saw me and stood up abruptly. "Sarah," he whispered, not believing his eyes. Mrs. Eleanor, hearing my name, crawled to the threshold. "My dear, I knew you would come," she cried. "I knew you wouldn't abandon us. You've surely come to take us home, right?" I looked up at them. I didn't get closer. I stopped at a safe distance with the bodyguards forming an almost invisible barrier around me. My assistant approached Michael and handed him a large paper envelope. Michael took it with trembling hands, full of hope. He thought he would find money in it. He opened it and took out several documents. His gaze ran down the first page from top to bottom. His heart sank. They were divorce papers. All his faults were listed there. Infidelity, psychological abuse, abandonment, and the night he threw me out in the rain. I spoke. "I want you to sign them," I said in a firm but not shouting voice. "I don't want this process to drag on. I need to close this chapter. I don't want to be tied to you, not even on paper." Mrs. Eleanor began to sob loudly. "Don't do this, my dear," she pleaded. "Don't destroy your family. I promise I'll be a good mother-in-law. I was wrong, but we all make mistakes. I beg you, don't leave us like this." I looked at her for a moment. "The family didn't defend me when I needed it," I replied. "When I was soaked outside, you were inside applauding your son's mistress. That is not family." I then took out a smaller white envelope and placed it on an old chair on the porch. "Here is some money," I added. "This is not compensation or alimony or anything like that. It is charity. I am giving it because I have a duty to help the poor. Use this for medicine and food for a few days. After that, there will be nothing more from me. You two are now just 2 strangers I once knew." Without waiting for a response, I turned and went back to the car. Mrs. Eleanor's sobs and Michael's muffled protests were left behind. My bodyguards closed the door. The car drove off. The divorce proceeded quickly. On the day of the court hearing, the sky was overcast. Michael came in a borrowed shirt, without a lawyer to represent him. I arrived with my legal team. The judge listened to the evidence, which was overwhelming. The verdict was clear. The marriage was dissolved. I kept all my assets, and he had no right to anything. Leaving the court, Michael tried to run up to me one more time, but my bodyguards blocked his way. I got in the car, they closed the doors, and we drove away. No more words were needed. When Michael returned to the alley where the rented room was, he found his few belongings and his mother's things thrown outside. The landlord had decided to evict them for not paying the rent. A new month was beginning, and he didn't want problems. Mrs. Eleanor was sitting on the sidewalk, hugging a bundle of old clothes. The sky opened up again. It started to rain. They had nowhere to go. They sought shelter under the awning of a closed shop. They sat on the floor, surrounded by plastic bags, looking at the wet street. It was like reliving the night they had thrown me out. Only this time, on the other side of the door, there was no warm house. Mrs. Eleanor whispered my name between broken prayers, asking for forgiveness and begging for a miracle. But the miracles did not come. The rain fell with force as a black luxury car slowly drove down a nearby avenue, stuck in traffic. It was my grandmother's Rolls-Royce. Michael recognized it immediately. Through the steamed-up but street-lit window, he could see the interior. My grandmother was sitting there next to me. The atmosphere was warm, the lights soft. I held a steaming cup of tea in my hands. I was laughing at something she had just said. My face was serene, my eyes full of life. My grandmother looked at me with pride, and from time to time took my hand with a tender gesture. Michael looked at them with his clothes stuck to his body, with his hair dripping, with his fingers numb. He felt something inside him finally break. The traffic jam began to move. The Rolls-Royce slowly started, then accelerated, disappearing behind the curtain of water. In the car, I was not looking to the sides. I did not see Michael or Mrs. Eleanor huddled by the closed shop. For me, that story was already closed. I was looking ahead, at the road that life now offered me. In the company of my grandmother's love and supported by my own effort. Outside, on the wet sidewalk, Michael fell to his knees, covered his face with both hands, and burst into tears. Not just from the cold, not just from hunger, but from the certainty that nothing he had lost could be recovered. Mrs. Eleanor, next to him, was too exhausted to cry anymore. She just stared into the void with empty eyes. That one sentence my grandmother had uttered in front of the mansion, "Reduce it to rubble," had come true in a way that no one in that house could have imagined. It wasn't just the party, the cake, or the expensive furniture that was destroyed. An entire life built on betrayal and abuse was demolished. The house, the money, the prestige, the mistress, the false friendships, everything was gone. And amidst those ruins, something new was born. A woman who learned never again to let anyone throw her out into the rain. Meanwhile, for Michael, the worst punishment was not poverty, but having to live with the knowledge that the woman he had humiliated was living better without him than with him, and that this punishment, unlike the storm, would have no end. And so, this story comes to an end. A story of pain and betrayal, but above all, of rebirth and the extraordinary strength that can blossom from the ruins of a former life. Now, I would like to know your opinion. How do you feel after hearing Sarah's story? Do you think justice was served? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Every voice is incredibly valuable to me. In closing, from the bottom of my heart, I wish that you never encounter anyone on your path who tries to extinguish your inner light. May you be surrounded only by people who appreciate your worth, and may your homes always be filled with warmth, love, and mutual respect. All the best.